begin with just a brief introduction from a book that I've been reading, Wade in the Water, which is a book by Arthur Jones on the spirituals. And I think it's good to revisit some of the stereotypes we have about the spirituals, and some that I grew up that are mistaken ideas. So I thought I would begin with that and introduce our distinguished guests. And so let's begin. Angela's going to talk more about Wade in the Water, but this is the name of the book, and I think it's very interesting because Wade in the Water, that spiritual has many layers. It has the layer of spirit and the idea of Christian and Jewish ideas. It also has, it heralds back to African rituals around water. And also, it has to do with the Underground Railroad. But I'll let Angela tell you more. But these spirituals have many layers. They are not just songs of faith. They're songs of justice and freedom. So one misnomer I had to get over is that maybe Christian masters were nicer, but they weren't. So this was the religion they were exporting to, or trying to teach their slaves. But what they were teaching was obedience and subservience, and an idea of punishing a God that would punish you for whatever, quote, sins you had. And this is from a former slave, formerly enslaved. She was interviewed in Canada in 1863 after she escaped. She said, "Those who were Christians and held slaves were the harvest masters." Now everybody that has got common sense knows that Sunday is a day of rest. And if you do the least thing in the world that they don't like, they will mark it down against you. And Monday you have got to take a whipping. Now the card player and the horse racer, you know, those big sins of card playing and horse racing, they will be there to trouble you. They will eat their breakfast, feed their dogs, and then be off. And you won't see them again till night. I would rather be with a card player or a sportsman by half than be with a Christian. In fact, the book Wade in the Water and others talk about the conversion to Christianity was slow among the enslaved, because they had to distinguish between the hypocritical hypocritical religion of their masters from true Christianity. So they wouldn't have liked the hymn, "They'll know you're Christians by your love." They weren't experiencing that. And they rejected the slaveholder's gospel of obedience to master and mistress. And some of the spirituals have this idea, some that we sang a couple weeks ago, I think, or maybe even last week. "Lord, I want to be a Christian in my heart, in my heart. Lord, I want to be a Christian in my heart." So they saw the hypocrisy just right in their own living arrangements. Another sign that they realized that this was a problem is the spiritual "I got a robe." You got a robe. All God's children got a robe. Everybody talking about heaven ain't going there. And I'm reading Arthur Jones first. Most scholars today believe that the enslaved were converted slowly, and that the distinctive theological tenets, or at least worship style, of the slave communities were derived from their African roots, and that theirs was a religion of syncretism. Now, when I was a child, that word was a naughty word or bad word in Christianity. We have the pure faith. There's no such thing. Christianity is syncretistic at its roots. We have Greek influences, we have Jewish influences, we have influences throughout the ages. And when a religion is taken in by another culture, there's going to be some give and take. And the beauty of the African American spiritual is that we get to hear those African spiritual roots. And one of those was the excitement or the ecstasy that came through dancing and drumming. And you can hear that in many of the spirituals. But I love this one. Every time I feel the Spirit moving in my heart, I will pray. It's every time I feel the Spirit moving in my heart, I will pray. And then you hear the references to the Old Testament. Up on the mountain, my Lord spoke. Out of his mouth came fire and smoke all around me, looked so shine. Asked my Lord if all was mine. And then the reference to the Jordan River, which is not only the reference to death, but also to escape from slavery. Jordan River is chilly and cold, chills the body, not the soul. Ain't but one train on this track, runs to heaven and right back. Now the African American spirituals, they're an oral tradition, but thanks to the Fisk singers in the 1870s and their leadership, their choir leadership, they were given a rebirth when a group of students from Fisk University in Nashville began a tour in order to raise money for the university. And the Fisk Jubilee Singers not only carried spirituals to parts of the U.S. that had previously never heard African American folk songs, the musically trained chorus performed before royalty during their tours of Europe in the 1870s. And it was really through this effort that they began to be written down and saved. And we also know the importance of the spirituals for the civil rights movement. And here's an example. May 1963, there was a children's crusade in Birmingham. And you see Birmingham police officers taking signs from young people participating in that crusade. And I'm looking at the signs. Can a man love God and hate his brother? We are all one in Christ Jesus. The police taking those signs. The effort was a part of the larger Birmingham campaign of 1963, a movement widespread to stop segregation in Birmingham. And one of the songs that helped them, encouraged them, that they sang as they walked and marched, is the spiritual "Oh Freedom." And I didn't ask Howard to sing this ahead of time, but can you give us the
It's actually fun.
well, you'll get to hear it. The Spirit works, so.
Yeah, we great minds ran together on selecting songs.
Great. Yay. So this African American spiritual was important to renew and replenish and encourage the marchers. Enough about me. I want you to meet Howard Lee, and I don't know if you've ever been mentioned as a gospel singer. Yes. One of his many attributes. And so I spent a lot of time with your biography yesterday, and I realized I could not give enough to all that you've done. But I do want to point out something, and that is while Mayor Lee was, during his tenure, he addressed legislators in Washington, D.C., convincing them to provide federal funding to modernize water and sewer lines in the North Side community. Imagine that this had to be done in the 1960s. And he faced major opposition while trying to implement a public transportation system. Today that system is one of the most widely recognized in the country. And in fact, on the 21st of June, the transit program gave the title to their building to the Lees, Howard and Lillian Lee, in their honor. And what a joy that this program went from a few buses to one of the fastest growing electric bus fleets. And also distinguished among us is Angela Lee, who's executive director of the Hayti Heritage Center, which opened in 1975 and is deeply rooted in that community. And Angela grew up in Chapel Hill, went on to get a BA at Harvard, came back and got her law degree at UNC Chapel Hill. She worked with the athletics department at UNC, and then went on to be the executive director of this important center. And the Hayti Heritage Center is in an area of Durham which was known as the Black Wall Street. But anyway, she oversees the cultural enrichment and arts education facility that promotes cultural understanding through diverse events, activities, etc. to preserve and embrace the experiences of Americans of African descent. And that's all I have to say, and I'm going to give the program over to Howard and Angela. Why don't we give them...
Thank you all for taking your extra time on a Sunday morning to come and hear my dad and me. Let me start by saying I'm certainly not an expert, and raise your hand if you can't hear me. My dad said I talk too softly, so I'll try to keep the volume up. I'm not an expert on spirituals, but I've grown up listening to, humming, singing spirituals. I love music in general, but the spirituals have always had a particular connection in my heart and in my spirit. I've directed spirituals at choirs, and of course in my work at the Hayti Heritage Center, we often feature performers with all types of music backgrounds, spirituals included. So let's talk about Negro spirituals. Noted educator and psychologist Kenneth B. Clark, whose well-documented doll test might be familiar to some of you, wrote about contributions of blacks to American art and culture. He wrote, and I quote, "All aspects of the arts have been pursued by Black Americans, but music provides a special insight into the persistent and inescapable social forces to which Black Americans have been subjected," end quote. This truth is evidenced in music rooted in the African American experience, including blues, gospel, jazz, and Negro spirituals. Negro spirituals have influenced these and other genres of music in America and throughout the world. What are Negro spirituals? Let's first talk about what they're not. The term slave songs has been used, but it's not a precise term. It refers to spirituals as well as work chants, hymns, ballads of sorrow, protest songs, and humorous ditties. Songs such as "I'm Sold and Going to Georgia" tell of the horror of being sold in the Deep South, but had flowery literary tones and are of white origin. "Oh, when shall we poor souls be free? When shall slavery chains be broke? I'm sold and going to Georgia. Will you go with me? I'm sold and going to Georgia. Go sound the Jubilee." Likewise, minstrel songs were popularized in the 19th century. Songs such as "Jump Jim Crow" were written by whites and feature exaggerated Southern Black dialect and celebrate a world that never existed, a sunny country with blacks carefree, spending their days singing and dancing. And there's another category of music, ballads, that emerged in the 20th century with songs by modern white composers about Black people and their history. Ballad of Harriet Tubman and Follow the Drinking Gourd are two that were written by folk singer Woody Guthrie, who also, because of his admiration for Harriet Tubman, wrote a letter on the 40th anniversary of her death to Harriet Tubman. And he wrote, "I hope that I can do some little kind of a job or two of work every day to hold on to all of your good things. More than a good 99% of everybody I know feel just the very same way that I feel about going right on and working and fighting till we kill that old snake of slavery that you crippled as bad as you crippled it," end quote. Negro spirituals are not songs about enslaved Africans, but rather they're songs by enslaved Africans who were living witnesses to the horrors of American slavery and the comforting, strengthening religion they created that combined Christianity and their own African spiritual traditions. In the 246 years that enslavement of African Americans was legal in North America, we don't know how many Negro spirituals were created. We don't know the names of the enslaved who created them. We don't know the age of any particular Negro spiritual or how many changes those spirituals underwent as they were transferred from one plantation to another or from one generation to another. What we do know is that Negro spirituals are brilliant, that blacks in their pre-slavery patterns of life in America, in Africa, used rhythm, melody, and lyrics to hold on to reality, hope, and acceptance of life. We can speculate that later in America, music helped blacks endure the cruelties of slavery, and that spirituals, along with gospel music, provided a medium for communion and for communication. Negro spirituals balance true artistry with depth of feeling, grief, rage, love, gratitude, joy, bitterness, compassion, and hope. The result is music that speaks to the human spirit and to the soul. The great abolitionist Frederick Douglass, who escaped enslavement, gave this description, quote, "While on their way, they would make the dense old woods for miles around reverberate with their wild songs, revealing at once the highest joy and the deepest sadness. They would compose and sing as they went along, consulting neither time nor tune," end quote. Negro spirituals were entirely improvised, refined as they passed from one plantation to another, taking on new forms and variations as they went, and creating new ones based on events of the day. For enslaved people, singing was a way to build community that was otherwise forbidden. It was a source of strength, comfort, and mental distraction from cruelties they faced every day. Singing was and remains a form of prayer. And these spirituals reveal an absolute faith in a God to deliver them from their bondage someday. Why are Negro spirituals so popular? They're in all the hymn books, seemingly no matter what denomination. Negro spirituals are an intrinsic part of American music. They're taught at youth camps, in churches, schools, concert halls, and in other settings. I believe it's because the music is so beautiful and so filled with raw emotion. It is my hope that the reality of spirituals, their creation from the cruel circumstance of human bondage, has not been lost on those who hum them, hear them, sing them. It is my hope that more and more churches will recognize that the people, those artists who created spirituals, were never acknowledged or compensated for their work, and that at the very least, the impact of their music on our culture and on music throughout the world should be ever present in our thoughts. Hard experience taught enslaved Africans to speak in roundabout ways, even in songs. They chose coded expressions carefully to exchange encouragement and pass along information. The song, "I Can't Stay Behind," likely had a double meaning, referring to going to heaven in the religious sense and escaping to freedom in the practical sense. Listen to these words. "I can't stay behind, my Lord, I can't stay behind. There's room enough, room enough, room enough in the heaven, my Lord. I've been all around in the heaven, Lord, I can't stay. I can't stay behind, I searched every room. The angels singing, I can't stay behind. My Father called, I can't stay behind." Hymnals are filled with Negro spirituals, perhaps some of your favorites, such as "Swing Low, Sweet Chariot" and "Nobody Knows the Trouble I've Seen." I've asked my dad if he will come and sing just a few snippets of both of those songs.
In singing this song when I grew up, it was based on the belief that somewhere in the future there would be freedom and there would be comfort. So swing low. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Nobody knows the trouble I see. Nobody knows but Jesus. Nobody knows the trouble I feel. Oh, glory, hallelujah. Sometimes I'm up, sometimes I'm down. Oh my God. Sometimes I'm almost to the ground. Oh my God. Nobody knows the trouble I see. Nobody knows but Jesus. Nobody knows the trouble I feel. Oh, glory, hallelujah.
Thank you. Negro spirituals often include references to the angel Gabriel and to Moses. Gabriel is featured in spirituals as well as in secular music, maybe as a result of the influence of spirituals on American music. The song, In That Great Getting Up Morning, tells about the coming of Judgment Day. In the song, the angel Gabriel is implored to blow his trumpet. He asked the Lord how loud he should blow it. That exchange between the angel Gabriel and the Lord, along with lyrics that describe lightning flashing, thunder crashing, stars a falling, and chariots a calling, both powerful and impactful. And one of my favorite Negro spirituals is Go Down Moses. It is argued that nowhere in the entire literature of spirituals is the identification between the black slave and the biblical Israelite Moses more direct than in this song. Enslaved Africans often recounted the triumphs of Moses in delivering the Israelites. In modern times, this song has been sung often during the Seder, the meal that celebrates the Hebrews' escape from slavery in Egypt. This song, Go Down Moses, is haunting, it's mournful, yet it's hopeful. As my dad sings some of this song, please note that haunting melody as well as the lyrics.
Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt land. Tell old Pharaoh, let my people go. When Israel was in Egypt land, let my people go. Oppressed so hard they could not stand, let my people go. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt land. Tell old Pharaoh to let my people go. And when we sung that song in church, Pharaoh were the white people who dominated blacks in the communities at that time. And that was our way of expressing a reaction to that and to that spirit.
Thank you. No, just love that song. Another favorite of mine, and Stephanie mentioned it in her remarks, is Wade in the Water. I'm going to call on my dad once again for his vocal assistance. Now, this song has remained one of the most celebrated spirituals, with its double meaning that helped guide slaves along routes to freedom, as well as reference to God and the Spirit. Its message resonates with the hope and the spirit that underscored the spirit and the soul of enslaved Africans determined to be free. And as my dad sings, I'm going to invite you all to just kind of clap along with me.
And if anybody wants to sing, please join in. Wade in the water, wade in the water too. Wade in the water, God's trouble in the water. See that man dressed in white, God's trouble in the water. Leader looks like Israelite, God's trouble in the water. Wade in the water, wade in the water too. Wade in the water, God's trouble in the water. See that man all dressed in red, God's trouble in the water. Looks like the hand that Moses led, God's trouble in the water. Wade in the water, wade in the water too. Wade in the water, God's trouble in the water. Now that was the role played by the minister who led the congregation in the singing of that song before the sermon.
And wading in the water and crossing the Jordan meant both going to heaven and striking out for freedom. Enslaved Africans strongly identified with the plight and escape of the ancient Hebrews, a seemingly obvious connection between bondage in Egypt and in America. Again, abolitionist and former slave Frederick Douglass noted that when he and other enslaved people sang about the promised land, or Canaan, they had a special meaning. So the song, "O Canaan, sweet Canaan, I am bound for the land of Canaan." Douglass noted that the words symbolized more than a hope of reaching heaven. He said, "We meant to reach the north, and the north was our Canaan." So I want to talk a bit more about these two songs and their strong connection with the story of Canaan and the Israelites. Go Down Moses has additional lyrics that tell the story of perseverance and triumph. I'll just lift a few. As Israel stood by the waterside at God's command, it did divide. When they reached the other shore, they sang a song of triumph o'er. Pharaoh said he'd go across, but Pharaoh and his host were lost. Jordan shall stand like a wall, and the walls of Jericho shall fall. Your foes shall not before you stand, and you'll possess fair Canaan's land. And finally, to bring the connection full circle in Go Down Moses, it goes, "We need not always weep and mourn and wear these slavery chains forlorn." And then Go Down Moses, way down in Egypt's land. "Tell, O Pharaoh, let my people go." Wade in the Water makes similar references in its additional lyrics. Jordan's water is chilly and cold. It chills the body, but not my soul. And to me, the most powerful. If you get there before I do, tell all my friends I'm coming too. That's hope. And then wade in the water. Wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. The power of words, music, faith, and the human spirit. As the Black experience in America became more complex, so too did Black music, which dramatically affected the general development of American music, such that the music provides a powerful lens through which we could view the history of Black Americans in new and revealing ways. The Negro spirituals and work songs were perfectly suited for the newer, more militant protest and civil rights lyrics created at student-led protests, at lunch counter sit-ins, on picket lines, in jails, and on freedom rides. The spiritual, "Oh Freedom," was sung in the wake of Nat Turner's Rebellion, but it could be sung in 1960 without even needing to change any of the words. When new words were added, they often blended so easily as to be virtually indistinguishable from the traditional. The original verse was, "No more moaning, no more moaning, no more moaning over me. And before I'll be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free." And Dad, if you'd like to accompany me or share with the group the freedom version, instead of "no more moaning," it simply went, "Oh freedom."
Oh, freedom, oh, freedom, oh, freedom over me. And before I'll be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. That was a marching song that was sung during the civil rights movement. And I apologize for my voice, I'm getting old, so I don't have to sing.
And there was another one similarly, "Over My Head." And originally it went, "Over my head, I hear music in the air. Over my head, I hear music in the air. Over my head, I hear music in the air. There must be a God somewhere." During the marches, the words changed just a little bit.
Over my head, I see freedom in the air. Over my head, I see freedom in the air. Over my head, I see freedom in the air. There must be a God somewhere.
Other prominent protest songs included "Don't You Let Nobody Turn You Around," and what would become the theme of the civil rights movement, "We Shall Overcome." Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said of freedom songs, and I quote, "The freedom songs are playing a strong and vital role in our struggle. They give the people new courage and a sense of unity. I think they keep alive a faith, a radiant hope in the future, particularly in our most trying times." End quote. These words could certainly apply to the Negro spiritual. And what I'd like, as we're drawing to the end of our program, we're near the end, if you all, as you're able, would stand and join us as we just sing a verse of "We Shall Overcome." Please join us. Join me.
We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday.
be seated. Thank you. So in conclusion, let me say, Negro spirituals are the legacy of the generations of people enslaved for 246 years in North America. They are the legacy of descendants of those enslaved people and of those who have embraced those songs in churches, schools, concert halls, camps, and throughout the fabric of our lives. The incredible strength and resiliency of enslaved Africans was a testament to their ability to combine a Christian spirit with their own spiritual traditions in order to survive a world in which they were forced to live. Let us not forget the why, and let us constantly seek ways to uplift and pay forward the gift that we share as we listen to, hum, sing, recall Negro spirituals. These songs, this music, help preserve our history and our heritage, and they tell our stories. Thank you.
It had been our plan for me to sing some additional songs, but as you can tell, I'm losing my voice. But there were other songs that we thought might be appreciated in terms of the messages that come through those songs. Such songs as I've Got a Road, I've Got a Road, You've Got a Road, All of God's Children Got a Road. Were You There? Climbing Jacob's Ladder. And of course, Steal Away to Jesus. All of these central themes running through the singing of spirituals in churches, in gatherings, was one that gave hope to those of us who were living under repressive environments at that time. Certainly, I'm not old enough to have experienced slavery, but I've experienced repression and oppression that is very similar. When I was in high school, I was hired once to join with a group of my classmates to relocate a Sears and Roebuck warehouse in Atlanta. And of course, when black folk were working in the hot sun and doing all of the stuff in the fields, song was the thing that gave the strength and the stamina to keep pushing forward. So we always sang. Of course, in this occasion, we were singing as we worked. And the person, the white guy who was in charge, hated the fact that we would sing. And so he demanded that we never sing while we were working, that we should be working instead of singing. But that's the kind of attitude that was exhibited during that time. But still, song was the thing that made us. As I mentioned to Angela, when I was in Korea, stationed on the front lines and didn't have a whole lot to do, the spiritual was also a very strengthening symbol for me at that time as well. So I started writing a book on spirituals. Never published it, but it's there, and I showed it to her last night. And I listed all of the songs that were so very important. Of course, I think it is extremely important that we keep these spirituals alive, just as I think. And some people disagree with me, and that's fine. I think we should not destroy history. I think we should not destroy symbols of what we've experienced. I think we need to know, and young people need to know. I'll never forget my youngest daughter, when she was in middle school, came to me once because she heard her mother and I talking about segregation and repression and so forth. And so she came to me and said, "Dad, what is segregation?" I think kids have to grow up knowing what segregation is, knowing what repression is. These spirituals may not be the complete answer, but they are a symbol of what we've experienced, and we have every obligation to not only pass it on to future generations, but never again allow it to occur. And we're living in a time now where the spiritual is so important. It was the spiritual that gave the slaves the ability to survive the oppression that was heaped upon them. It was the spiritual that carried people through the civil rights movement, that walked the streets and were beaten and so forth. It was the spiritual that today I think will come back again and be a strengthening symbol to help us survive these trying times. So finally, in the early 1990s, I ended up producing an album in conjunction with North Carolina Central University with the late Charles Gilchrist, using certain choir members from Central. Didn't become a bestseller, so I still got a few albums left. So I brought with me today copies of the album and copies of the cassette tapes. You can take either one or both. I got plenty left. So I thought if you'd like to, I don't know if anybody has LP players anymore, but at least you have.
And you can buy them,
Yeah. So please feel free to take a copy of this and so forth. I want to thank Stephanie for the privilege of participating with her in presenting this program. I hope you all have found some meaning out of this, and just very proud of my daughter, what she has done and is doing to carry on the tradition. And last night we were meeting with my daughter, my wife, and my youngest daughter said, I'm glad you got a Harvard education. So it does sadden me that we are living in times that is like a bad movie that's coming back again, and I'm reliving it one more time. But I still have great hope for the future, and I have great confidence that these songs will still be a strengthening spirit.
Any questions for Howard or Angela?
I had a quick question about, and I think it was Weight on the Water, and they mentioned someone had on a white robe and then someone had on a red robe. Is there, do you know the symbolism between the different colors?
I can speculate.
Okay.
Because one referred to Israelites and the band that Moses led. So I think that I don't know that red or white represented anything other than simply different colors that were symbolic. If so, I don't know. And I'm not informed, but I know that they refer to those different sects, those different groups.
Do you have a favorite resource for finding or samples of what resources would you recommend to do further research on?
Well, of course, Stephanie's made mention of the book Weight in the Water, which is an excellent resource. But I think these days you can pretty much Google anything, including any of the music that you want, any and all. I mean, there's so much that it takes you to so many different locations, but it's not hard to find, and that's the good thing about it.
I would say, if you like this music, join a gospel choir. There are some good ones around, and the practices are uplifting. Absolutely wonderful. So, go for it.
I think it's fascinating that these songs all found their way into the hymnals of all of the white churches. Because as a child growing up in segregated eastern North Carolina, all of the songs that Howard sang this morning are familiar to me. I grew up singing them. Now, were there any black members of that church? Not one, except one guy that came as a guest of a missionary from Nigeria, and that was just as a guest one Sunday. So that's fascinating. And that occurred. And then this morning, I don't know, on the way here, I was listening to Willie Nelson's book, Bobby and Me, or Me and Bobby, Me and Bobby. And for him, the spirituals were amazingly important. He was a teacher. He was a Sunday school teacher in Texas for a couple of weeks. Until the preacher said, asked him after he was baptized, well, what do you do for a living? And he says, I'm a singer and a writer and so forth, guitar player. Well, where do you play these things? Well, I play them for people. And he said, well, do you play in honky-tonks? Well, yeah. Well, do you think God's in a honky-tonk? He says, well, absolutely, God's everywhere. Anyway, they made him stop being a teacher. But he was saying that one of, his music has been influenced by the spirituals and by all of the black jazz players he played with as he was growing up in Texas. And so during that time, it's interesting to me that while some places there were the horrors of segregation, awful, awful things, there were also people just living and getting along, learning from each other, living together. Carolyn Thornton, who was a mentor of mine over at Lincoln Health Center, she told wonderful stories about her childhood. So, I don't know. We can't forget it.
No, we should.
The only experience I had growing up that was not segregated was when my junior high chorus, or junior high, had an exchange with Hillside High. This would have been the 53-54 school year. I was in the chorus. I know you can't believe that if you hear me sing now. The school, high school at least, gave students the choice of going or not going. And they had to say, I did it. And it was a very moving sort of exchange. Those schools were, I would say, an hour and a half apart. But it was like going to another continent when we went over to Hillside. And it must have been for those students. This was the year before the Brown versus the Board decision. And I wondered as an adult, who made that decision? That was a courageous thing to do. And all those music teachers, principals, or just who. I was an eighth grader and just, but it was music that drew some portion of the black and white communities together in 1953.
Carolyn went to Hillside, and she said in an article that I read not too long ago, that was published years ago, that for her, being in a segregated school at that time actually was a lot better than being in the integrated schools initially. Now, because they had great teachers and great, people that they associated with and role models and so forth that disappeared following the integration. So it was a mixed bag. I didn't appreciate that until I read that. Not that anybody wants to go back to that time, but sometimes there were things that are complex, like Tim Ross had a way of saying it,
But we thank you, and I wonder if, Dorothy, could you tell us about not next week, but the week after? We're not meeting for our forum on the 24th.
Yes, Natalie Borman, who is a ceramics artist, has a studio out Highway 54 West, is coming to show us some of her work and to bring clay for us to play with. She makes something that looks like red hood pottery. Beautiful. There will be an announcement in the newsletter, and maybe we can get some additional publicity also, Stephanie.
Maybe so. And then on the 7th, Meredith?
On August 7th will be our last forum for the summer, always here, 9:45 to 10:30. We're going to gather people who express a part of their faith through fabric. So there are people in this congregation who knit prayer shawls, others who make lap quilts that are comforting to people. So we hope to gather a good selection of these artists to share with us their art and what they put into the work.
Thank you again to Howard and Ann for